As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, bring the puck deep, put pucks in deep. We got to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
The 2024-25 coaching carousel is underway. Jim Montgomery has been hired, and Jim Montgomery has been fired. No longer with the Bruins, now with the St. Louis Blues. The Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast is back. It's episode 19, and oh my gosh, I think I am seeing a ghost. Matt Leonardo, didn't know you were still rocking with us. What's up, buddy?
I know, Halloween, much like a ghost town. I got the white big shirt on right now to kind of resemble that as well. But things have been going well. Obviously work and personal things kind of come up here and there, but had some time right around the Thanksgiving holiday to make some time for the Fifth Liners Podcast, as always. So appreciate you having me on, Casey.
A long month of corporate America, and Matt is now residing in Tennessee, the state that I am just about to depart to. As we hop off this call, I will be driving the next 18 hours to come down to your parts. Quick stop in Rochester tonight, and then getting picked up as the Clarkson Golden Knights head down for the Smashville Women's Showcase, and trying to convince Maddie to come make a trip down, see where the cowboy boots and cowboy hats go. But Matt, plenty of NHL news to cover as we get going here in the first and probably the biggest, as this week has blown up around the Boston Bruins, who have not been able to get it going. We've talked about it almost every episode, and now Jim Montgomery is out of office. And it didn't take more than a week, just 5 days later, the St. Louis Blues fire their coach, and Montgomery is into the spot. And you got to feel bad for the interim tag. Now Montgomery, which seems like the Blues' plan, where they held on as long as they can back in May before they make the official announcement to stick with their staff. And then now the second Montgomery becomes an availability, he's headed to St. Louis, where he was formerly an assistant.
Right. You mentioned Casey. He was an assistant there in 2020 or 22. So there's a few guys on the team that know his style and kind of how he likes to coach. And very rarely do you see a guy who's got a 66% point percentage in the last 3 or 4 seasons get on the open market. I saw a stat that the 2023 Jack Adams finalists, all 3 are without a job just 18 months after. Just tells you how cutthroat the NHL is, right? And especially in Boston, where winning is a culture up there, and you kind of realize, if you're not winning games in the immediate future, it's now or never pretty quickly there. And I think there's been a lot of communications on, at what point do you start to put the blame on Don Sweeney and Cam Neely and the ownership group up there in Boston. But I think for St. Louis, you go on a little bit of a skid. You've got an interim head coach, and you get a guy as well touted as Jim Montgomery on the market who knows the system and knows some of the guys in St. Louis. I think it's an absolute no-brainer for the Blues.
On the Boston side, they are in rears, although they pick up a win to get back above 500. In the Metro, they're hanging on for their dear life in the wild card position. The Buffalo Sabres have notched themselves into the top 3. The Lightning on a backtrack. The Ottawa Senators have turned into a dumpster fire over the last 10 days. And the Bruins are still fine in position at 10-9-3. But the way that they've gotten to 10-9-3 has been nowhere near what we're used to seeing in Boston Bruins hockey.
Right. And I think it's one of those things where they're just not finding their stride, right? I think it's just, they play a good game here and there, and then, you get blown out at home by Columbus on a Monday night and you're getting booed off the ice. And I think that was the last straw for Don Sweeney with Jim Montgomery. But, the big issue that we've talked about all year has been middle six scoring. Last year, they had a really big emergence from guys like Charlie Coyle and Jake DeBrusk, who's now in Vancouver, to add some scoring behind their stars. And this year, that just hasn't been the case. I think Matt Poitras was the guy that was going to be that face, and ultimately he ends up getting hurt. And, you think Fabian Lysell or Georgi Merkulov are going to make that jump, and they've had a cup of coffee in the NHL this year. But I think for Boston, again, like you mentioned, there's a lot of teams that are in that middling ground in the Eastern Conference. So if Joe Sacco can get those guys going in the right direction, I think they'll be just fine. I mean, they've got a lot of talent on that team, especially on that blue line. And once Swayman starts to play like he was over the past couple of seasons, I think they're going to be in an okay spot. But the more games you drop early on in the year, it's going to cost you later on.
A lot of the question comes back to Swayman and the long holdout that he put on. We talked with Jimmy Murphy at the start of the season, thinking that it could have gone to December and all those rumors. He comes in right at the start of the season. He has looked nowhere near what they need him to be. What part of the accountability do you put on Swayman's camp in the struggles that the Bruins have had?
Obviously for a goaltender, it's all about catching your stride, right? And if you're not working out with the team during the offseason, you're not seeing pucks in the preseason, it might take a little longer for some goalies as opposed to others. But I think part of it also kind of comes down to the fact that you don't have Linus Ullmark behind you to kind of pick you up and give you a night off here and there. They kind of thought maybe they could get away with it with Korpisalo, but again, he's looked like a traffic cone the past 2 or 3 months. And, do you call up Brendan Bussey from the AHL to potentially get something going there? I think it's just a lot is on the weight. Like a lot of weight is on the shoulders of Jeremy Swayman, and I'm not sure if he was super prepared for that at the start of the year. But at the same time, we've seen this guy play to such an elite level, especially when it matters most. So if they're playing games in January, February, and in March that really matter, I don't see why Jeremy Swayman can't turn that second gear on and really be a shutdown goaltender that Boston needs.
It's been 10 days since our last episode, and over that last 10 days, the injury front has turned over a few franchises. I want to start with Alex Ovechkin, who was one of the first big ones. Ovechkin, in every episode we've talked about so far, has been on record-setting pace. He goes out and has a hat trick 2 Sundays ago, is on pace for another hat trick with 2 goals at even strength on the Monday night contest, gets injured in the second period, and now will be out 4 to 6 weeks. The impact to Washington, where he has 17% of the team's total goals thus far this season, even at the ripe age Ovechkin is. How big of an impact is that, and does he have any chance, in your opinion, after this 4 to 6 out, of going anywhere near that record?
You mentioned 17% of the goals. That's a major impact on a Capitals team that has been really overperforming expectations coming into the year. And a lot of that was on the face of Alex Ovechkin, right? Last year, got off to a slow start, and we weren't really sure if we were ever going to see that 40, 50 goal guy. And he almost was on pace to do it in the first half of this season before the injury. He completely shut everyone down and said he is still that guy in terms of putting the puck in the net. I will say I did see him at the Washington Capitals game already walking with no crutches. He's an absolute machine. I know what's the comedian that does the Russian machine bit? You'll know it better than I would. But it's a good listen. If people out there will definitely know what I'm talking about. But maybe Alex Ovechkin is that guy that was on the train in that episode, because he is just an absolute horse. I think it will be closer to the 4 side than the 6 side in terms of time. And I think he knows that, right? I think he knows he's got a chance to break the record this year. And he's played with some unbelievable line mates this year. So I think he wants to be there as much as anybody else. So I think it's going to be a shorter stint on the injured reserve than we think. And I still think he does have a shot to catch Gretzky just in this calendar year.
The Vancouver Canucks are beaten and bruised. And now JT Miller taking a leave of absence for an unknown period of time. Also, a lot of unknowns around the reasons, and you got to hope that one of the leaders in that locker room and JT Miller is going to be all right. Again, not really sure what the reason around it is, likely mental health, but Vancouver already missing Derek Forbort, Thatcher Demko, and Brock Besser on the injured reserve. Now JT Miller out of that lineup, and they cannot afford to lose many games coming up here. Already 5th in the Pacific right now, and looking at the teams in front of them, it's not going to get much easier to climb those standings.
You're right, Casey. First and foremost, obviously wishing the best for JT Miller, and the reasons are undisclosed right now, but we're obviously open for the best there. But focusing kind of on Vancouver, you had mentioned at the start of the year how much of an impact it might be for Thatcher Demko to not be in that lineup. They get rid of Casey DeSmith as that steady backup, and Kevin Lankinen has a decent start to the season, but they really thought Arthur Chivos was going to be the guy in net, and he's kind of just been leaky at times. And when you're not able to rely on that goaltender, and you lose some of the guys that you got at the trade deadline last year, like Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov, this team wasn't as deep as they were last year. And it's kind of showing now that they've had a couple of injuries and people up and down the lineup. They're not as deep as we thought they were going to be going into the season, and it's really starting to poke holes into their roster.
The last and the big one for my team, Carolina Hurricanes, goaltending depth every single year seems to come into question, and now it is a detrimental point in the season. Freddie Anderson had knee surgery. He's out until at least late January, and the Columbus Blue Jackets excavated Jim Montgomery from Boston against Columbus on Saturday. Pyotr Kochetkov in overtime goes for his signature poke check and dives right in front of a charging Zach Werenski, defended by Sean Walker. Was what looked like knocked out, down, not moving on the ice for at least 45 seconds to probably a minute and a half there before being shakily taken off the ice mat. And, watching it from a fan perspective, from my perspective, immediately when he did it, it was kind of mind-boggling on like, what the heck was he thinking there? And you've seen the play. If anybody listening hasn't looked up Pyotr Kochetkov injury, it's a play where Walker has Werenski tied up easily coming up the left wing. There's no chance Werenski is going to be able to make a strong-sided move past him. All Kochetkov has to do is tie up that post and make sure there's not a near side shot, and then get across for a potential wraparound. Instead, he dives in front of the oncoming play and now is going to be out for an unknown period of time and likely a pretty brutal concussion there. And the Hurricanes have no goaltenders left. Spencer Martin, who they claimed off waivers, started the year in the AHL, and he's been able to fill some time. Last year, he came in and played 3 or 4 games there, but has never had to be a 1A in any set. And right now, they're down 3-1 as we record on Monday night to the Dallas Stars. And there's no backup to Martin. Yaniv Peretz has been playing in the ECHL, and I don't know that that's a guy that you want stepping in to try to take over your team, who right now is at the top of the Metro standings.
Yeah, I think it's not going to be very long for Spencer Martin to be the 1A there, and not because he's done anything wrong, but because you just can't go into an extended period of time, especially an unknown period of time, with an AHL and an ECHL goalie on your roster, right? I think they're going to have to find a way to get a goalie on the market. The one name that I think of, and part of it's because I'm a Sharks fan, but part of it's because consistently making trades with San Jose, when you look at the Brent Burns trade, you even look at some of the smaller deals that have been made between Carolina and San Jose. But Mackenzie Blackwood's played fairly solid, and they've called up Yaroslav Skalarov to get his first start against St. Louis last week. So, as a guy who's playing fairly well on a fairly bad San Jose team, at this point, you need somebody to stop pucks in front of the net. And I think anything that you can get for the value, knowing what kind of situation Carolina is in and the lack of leverage they have in that deal, is going to be important there. But like you mentioned, Casey, a tough situation when you have Freddie Anderson out for yet again another extended period of time, and then the uncertainties with concussions really makes this one a tough one for Carolina. But I think you got to find a way to get something in the market, whether it be off of free agency or trade.
Away from the negative news and quite a few positives that have happened over the 10 days. First was Connor McDavid notching his 1,000th point. What a way to do it, with the assists from Nurse and Draisaitl. He was tearing up in the post-game presser, being interviewed down on the ice, and one of the rare times we see Connor McDavid show any emotion, but you could tell how meaningful it was, and he mentions the importance of it coming from Draisaitl and Nurse there in the 3-on-3 overtime. Two guys that he's spent so much time in Edmonton with his entire career, as they've built the franchise from the ground up, quite literally. And now Edmonton, again, looking like they are Stanley Cup favorites.
Yeah, a great moment for the NHL with a guy as young as Connor McDavid, with such an amazing milestone in such a short amount of time. I think it was 629 games, which you think about the math there. Go offline and do it yourself. It's absurd with the numbers that McDavid's putting up. It's something we haven't seen since the guys like Gretzky and even early Crosby back in his day. But I think it's one of those things that you start to really hope that he can just keep maintaining this kind of pace. You think about NHL guys, typically their primes in their late 20s, and he's still a few years sniffed away from that. So I think we still have a lot more to come, hopefully, from Connor McDavid. And, with the extension to Draisaitl, it should be in Edmonton, you would expect, but we'll see how they're able to continue to put pieces around him to succeed. And even if not, I think McDavid's the kind of player that will build people up, and you can really put any kind of line mate around with them.
I was in the house when the Oilers silenced the Senators and really dampened my spirit towards the Sens Army, and that team is unbelievable. Watching Connor McDavid up close, even in warmups where we were down on the glass and we had upper bowl tickets, but when he takes the ice, it's another level of speed, even just in the warmups. And then Bouchard kicks off the game by going coast to coast, dangling through three defenders, toe drag, backhand shelf on Allmark. And then McDavid puts up 3 straight points in a 5-1 win there. The biggest takeaway for me was not anything to do with any of those 3 names, though. How about the rookie, Podkolzin, as well as Kapanen playing in between Draisaitl and McDavid? They've been shaking it up, and this Podkolzin kid has been lighting up the NHL this year. Just got his first career NHL goal, but he looked outstanding playing on that line, was nowhere out of place.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I've mentioned it before, you've kind of been able to put anybody next to Connor McDavid, but sometimes you need some skill and speed to be able to play with some of those good guys. And Podkolzin, a former high pick from Vancouver, gets traded off and just needs a change of scenery. And you think at Vancouver now, like, oh, you wish you had a guy like Podkolzin up in your top 6 to replace Brock Besser and JT Miller. But I think a change of scenery sometimes really helps players. And Podkolzin getting in one of the best situations possible, being able to play with McDavid and Draisaitl right now. And, he was picked in the top 15 of the draft for a reason. He's got skill and speed, and somebody saw something in him early on. And I think he's really starting to show that potential. I believe he's 23 or 24. So he takes a little bit of time to develop, but definitely helpful for Edmonton as they continue to show how much depth that team has. And, they signed Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson at the beginning of the year to fill those top 6 roles, but now you're getting it from guys like Kapanen and Podkolzin. It's going to be a very dangerous team to beat in the playoffs.
Zach Hyman has been non-existent. We're almost to that American Thanksgiving mark this week, and Hyman still lacking any mark. Where has his game gone in your eyes, where Hyman has gone from completely lighting up the NHL last year and one of the biggest boom players, all the hype around him this offseason, and even back to our episode of picking our fantasy franchises, every single one of us had Zach Hyman at the $5.5 million mark is a big steal. And this year, he's been a complete sleeper.
I think a lot of it just has to do with where Edmonton is scoring a lot of their goals, right? I feel like a lot of their scoring is coming from the power play up at the top and getting McDavid and Draisaitl the puck and letting them kind of do their thing, as opposed to, trying to get, that extra pass to Hyman in front that leaves him for a wide open backdoor shot. But I think Hyman is really, he's still playing fairly good hockey. It's not like anything that he's doing is much different than last year. I think it's just more of a situational thing. But I think if teams start to try and close in and prevent McDavid and Draisaitl from really putting up a ton of points, then you'll see a lot more opportunities for Hyman on the back door to be able to put in some pucks there and continue to get those numbers up to what they were similar to last year.
Into the Minnesota Wild, Marc-Andre Fleury, with 10,030 career starts, now becomes the 3rd all-time in career starts and passes Patrick Waugh. A big-time milestone for Fleury, who continues to notch him, and to become 2nd all-time now needs just 14 more. You got to think the Wild are going to put him in there for a 15th game at some point this season.
It'd be a disrespect if they didn't, right? And regardless of how well Philip Gustafsson has played, and he has played very well this year, when you have a chance to give a guy an opportunity to break records and get to 2nd place on a list of that prestige, you almost have to do that service. He could have easily retired over the past couple of years, but has taken some team-friendly deals to stay as the 1B in Minnesota and help Gustafsson develop into very good goaltender that he is today. So I think it's almost a no doubter that you see Fleury get to that 15th start at some point this year.
A close one for you and the San Jose Sharks with the jersey retirement of Jumbo Joe Thornton. An awesome ceremony and quite a few tearjerkers in the pregame speeches. The stories from his family telling of the time he paid for an apartment for a homeless woman and her kids, and how awesome his family and his wife, and then his speech talking to the kids and his wife about how he wouldn't be there without them. A well-deserved honor as he joins Patrick Marleau in the rafters.
Brings a tear to my eye seeing the shift of guys that I watched growing up and really made me love the game of hockey, whether it be those two or Pavelski as the third. And, you're kind of seeing that passing of the torch on to Celebrini and Will Smith as they go through this rebuild and are starting to show a little bit of light. But again, what an amazing ceremony for an amazing guy and an amazing player as well. You love to see some guys who are, just great individuals, achieve such great things and really be the face of a franchise. And, you'd be shocked if he doesn't end up being a first ballot future Hall of Famer with the accolades that he put up and the way he really carried San Jose through the last decade or so.
Ryan Reeves made headlines about a week ago now with a big-time hit on Darnell Nurse. Nurse now out of the lineup, likely to return in the coming days. But a 5-game suspension for Ryan Reeves, a pretty nasty hit that will cost him $35,156.25 in salary punishment through that time that he'll be suspended. And a lot of differing takes there. It came on Hockey Night in Canada between the Leafs and the Oilers there. Paul Bissonnette saying that it's not an intentional play, obviously, where he's not aiming to hit the head, and that there's still a place for big hits like that in hockey. A lot of other people coming out and pretty aggressively saying there's absolutely nowhere in the game for vicious plays like that. Reeves, obviously, a history of being a bruiser and a really nasty hit on Darnell Nurse, Matt. But the discussion continues with the physicality in the game and where to limit plays like that, where he's trying to go through the shoulder and instead goes straight into the head in a really ugly scene where Nurse is bleeding all over the place and ends up missing quite a few games.
Yeah, it's always tough when, you're trying to teach them so young how to hit the right way, but obviously one-off instances are going to happen where you just end up not expecting the guy to zig when you zag and you end up getting him in a spot like Reeves did on Nurse. Obviously, Ryan Reeves is a player that we know is going to finish his checks and try his best to bring a physical element to the game. It's kind of been his career for the most part. And I think a suspension is definitely worthy in the case that you see the picture of the elbow directly to the noggin. It's probably going to be a call and a suspension, but no, his feet were both on the ground and Nurse had the puck in that moment. I think it's one of those things where I think 5 is a decent number. I know some people are on the spectrum one way where no suspension, some are on the spectrum of the Rafi Torres suspension of 41 games. And typically I find myself kind of in the middle, kind of seeing both sides. And similar here, I think Ryan Reeves probably didn't have an intention to have Darnell Nurse bleeding all over the ice, but he definitely had an intent to finish his check there. And you got to know where it's 6'4", but you still got to know where your body's going to end up if you're going to hit that high. So, I think 5 games is probably the right number. But I'm always in this I've always had this thought, and Case, I'm curious about your thoughts here, where, a hit like that causes an injury that gets a player out for, let's say, 15 games. Maybe Reeves doesn't return until Darnell Nurse can get back on the ice. I know there's, always going to be some middle ground with that. If you end up getting a guy and he blows out his ACL for the whole year, do you really get suspended for the whole year? But I've always found that super interesting and kind of an interesting way to think about, you get Nurse out for the lineup, and so Reeves, you can't go back until Nurse is able to go out and play again. But
I think it's a tough one that the CBA would absolutely never allow to go into effect.
Oh gosh,
but,
no.
Yeah, I mean, you could even put in instead of a 5-game, 5 to 10, 10's usually the maximum penalty you see in a suspension, but up it to 15 or until the player you've injured return. That's an interesting thought. But yeah, I don't think we'll ever see an effect with the CBA on the protection side of the players. Matt, you've been away from the podcast for quite some time, and I always like to think that it's because you're afraid to show your face after some horribly hot takes in the offseason, one of which was your thoughts on the Calgary Flames being the absolute worst team in NHL history. Well, the Calgary Flames are over halfway to amounting the number of points that your San Jose Sharks did last season. Not only that, but they are well in position to be a playoff contender this year. They are currently 7th in the NHL with 27 points, currently tied as we record with the Ottawa Senators. And for my hopes, hopefully the Senators can knock off the streak. But upcoming, they have the Red Wings, who are in rears, the Blue Jackets, who are a tough team to play at home, but definitely beatable, the dumpster fire of the Pittsburgh Penguins, who I think are the worst team in the NHL. And then again, they play the Blue Jackets at home before Montgomery's Blues. A pretty easy upcoming schedule. We could see the Calgary Flames at the top of the Pacific as we near in on Christmas time. Do the Calgary Flames have staying power?
I think you're going to know my answer. I'm never going to not double down on my takes here, Casey. But I do have some numbers to kind of back it up a little bit. This team has issues scoring. It's very evident. You know, they're bottom half of the Western Conference in goals for. They're around the same amount of goals scored as San Jose and Utah this year. So, I mean, if we're going to talk about teams that are not putting the puck in the net very well, let's talk about Calgary in the same light as some of the teams that they're around there with Utah and San Jose. I really like Money Puck. They give you a lot of interesting numbers, and they summarize it in their power rankings, right? So whether it's Corsi, Fenwick, expected goals for, they've got a lot of great statistics that they're able to kind of put into their power rankings, and they have them 21st for a reason, right? Like, this team has been fairly lucky, and they've gotten some hot goaltending from Dustin Wolf at the right time. Now, do we think Dustin Wolf can hold on to that for 82 games? For my fantasy team, I sure hope he can. But do I realistically think that he's going to be a 1A that can get 55 starts in his rookie year and put up a .920 save percentage? Absolutely not. So I think at some point we see this team come down to the median. Now, are they going to be the worst team in the league? Probably not. They've gotten off to a fairly hot start, and they do have a fairly easy schedule coming into the Thanksgiving break here. But I do think this team is more of a wild card fighter as opposed to a top of the division team, especially when you got a team like Vancouver, who's probably going to get somewhat better in the latter half of the year. I still like some of the potential that you see out of Seattle. Their additions have looked fairly good this year. And then you've got Vegas, Edmonton, and the Kings, who the Kings have also looked like a fairly solid team this year as well. So with those three teams at the top of the Pacific, I find it really hard for Calgary to be able to keep pace with those teams. And that kind of puts them in a wild card where then they're fighting against some of the teams in the Central that we talked about before the season have looked very good. So I think it's still an uphill battle from where they are just based on the way that they've played, but they've at least set themselves up in a good position to be in that hunt come the end of the season here.
It'll be interesting what the Flames decide to do. A team trending towards a rebuild, and last time you were on, you said it was amid where Craig Conroy was saying they're searching for a middle six center. They still haven't made any trades in that direction. But last time you said it's a move you don't necessarily think that they should make at all because you don't want to try to hold on to it to maybe get to a first round playoff just to get knocked out when you're jeopardizing your future. Before we send it over to Pierre McGuire, an awesome interview that you and I got to sit in on, let's look at some fringe teams right now, teams you give the thumbs up to, teams you're worried about. The Ottawa Senators are the top of my worries list, now 7th in the Atlantic after being in the top 3 just a week ago. So we'll put the Senators there at 7 points. This is the fight for the Atlantic Division. The Sabres are in 3rd in the Atlantic at 23. The Bruins in 4th at 23. Who gets in? Who's out?
I find it tough to have a defense as good as Boston not in the playoffs. I think there's a winning culture there, regardless of whether Jim Montgomery's at the head or not. Joe Sacco has learned a lot from Montgomery at his time there, and I think they're going to start to pick it up because, you know, guys like Pasternak and Marchand, they're playing well, but not to the level that we've seen them play in the past. So I think that combined with their defense, and you have to expect Swayman to come back to the median at some point. I think Boston is a team that's in there. In terms of Buffalo or Ottawa, I'm having a tough time seeing either in, but I think similar to what we said at the beginning of the year, right? I think there was an upper echelon of teams in the top 7 or 8. And then there is this battle between teams 8 and about 24 where honestly, we still don't really know what the hell is going to happen to those teams, right? I think both Buffalo and Ottawa fall into that. And I think there's going to be a lot of key games from now until the end of the calendar year to figure out and separate yourself from that group of middling teams. So I would say between those two teams, I probably give the edge slightly to Ottawa, just based on the fact that they have a more reliable goaltender and they've been getting some really good play up top. I think Josh Norris has played unbelievable this year. You've got guys like Brady Tkachuk and Tim Stützle. So for me, I would probably bet more on the more experienced Ottawa team as opposed to the younger Buffalo team. But again, if we come back in December and Buffalo's still holding on and Ottawa's in the dumpster, I wouldn't be shocked either. So I think out of those 3 teams, the one that I'm the most confident in is probably Boston.
Metro, the Rangers, a teetering franchise right now. All kinds of trade rumors and trade hopes between the fan base. Tony D'Angelo from Russia on Twitter blasting their fan base for rooting for that. Obviously, it's going to get better for that roster, you have to think. But right now, the Rangers are in 4th place. We unanimously picked 3 Metro teams to get in. The Capitals have 27 points. The Rangers have 25. And as we mentioned, the Hurricanes could be coming with a big slide depending on how their crease situation plays out. Do we see 4 Metro teams in, or is one of those 3 dropping?
I think it's hard to not see all 4 of them getting in. I think even with the injury to Ovechkin, which I don't think is going to be very long, I think Washington's played well enough, and I think it's sustainable just based on where they're getting production from and how well that defense has played with the guys that they've added, whether it be Matt Roy or Jacob Chychrun. You look at the Hurricanes, and they've played so well off the back of Marty Necas, who I know you probably want to give some credit to at this episode with how well he's been playing. Even with that goaltending question in mind, I still think that defense has played super well. How do you count out the New York Rangers with the amount of talent that team has combined with Igor Shesterkin? And then you still have a team like New Jersey who, everyone had high hopes for this year, and they've continued to play super well with 30 points right now. Hard to not see New Jersey kind of make that push into the playoffs as well. We mentioned how up and down the Atlantic was. It would not shock me at all if it's 4-4 split there between the Atlantic and the Metro this year.
The West Coast wildcard chase. As we hit Thanksgiving, the Avalanche have cracked back into the top 4 after being the bottom of the West. They are now 4th in the Central, trailing the Stars by 2 and trailing the Jets at first place by 10. Utah at 19, tied with St. Louis. The Nashville Predators at 17 have now gotten out of last place in the NHL, and they've passed the Blackhawks by 1 point, but nowhere near where they need to be to get in. On the Pacific side, you have the Oilers, who have gotten to that 24-point mark, tied with the Avalanche. They are 4th in the Pacific behind the Kings and the Flames. The Canucks are behind them, and you said you like the Kraken. If you have to take a look at that wild card picture, who's in and who's out? Close it off.
I think one team that ends up getting in that's on the outside right now is Vancouver. I know they're having some issues in terms of personnel, but they've got 3 games in hand to Edmonton for that last wild card spot. And I think when they get hot at the right time, they're going to be able to show some of that power that they had last year and make a push into one of those playoff spots. In terms of a team that I have that is in right now that comes out for that, it's hard to not say Calgary, but other than Calgary, I think maybe Los Angeles has a little bit of a tough second half here. Their defense is still trying to find itself without Drew Doughty. They've played okay, I would say, at this point. But again, if they're not getting as much production from Quentin Byfield as you expect, and you're still kind of leaning on a couple of key guys, if you get one injury there, I don't know if they have as much depth as some of the other teams that we mentioned in this wild card race to keep that 3rd spot in the Pacific. So For me, I think if I had to push a team into it, it's probably Vancouver. If I had to push a team out, it's probably Calgary or the Kings. But I'd be shocked if the 4 teams that are in from the Central aren't the 4 teams come playoff time. I think Colorado is going to hit their stride at some point, and I think those top 3 teams in the Central have looked unbelievable this year.
Pierre McGuire comes up next, an awesome interview that we got to sit down with him, and we'll come back to close it off with an argument that Matt and I had about a month ago where Matt thinks he could score an NHL point given a full season of shifts, and I will tell him why that is not possible. You're listening to the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast. We'll be back in a moment. Up next, Pierre McGuire, one of the great legends of hockey broadcasting. It is an extreme pleasure for us to welcome on one of the guys we grew up watching on the big stage in the NHL, Pierre McGuire. Pierre, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Casey. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
You've been a busy man recently. You were at the Hall of Fame induction last week. Then I ran into you on the road at your stop on the unnamed team down the road that you used to coach for as the Clarkson Golden Knights took them on, a little ECAC women's hockey. Then the next night you're on the UMass broadcast. You've taken over a pretty big role with the ECAC. What is it about the current college hockey landscape that makes that a spot you want to spend your time right now?
Casey, I always was a college guy. When I was a kid growing up in Montreal, I had a chance to go play major junior. My father did not allow me to go. And I played a lot of other sports. I played football, I played hockey, I played baseball. So I've always been a huge proponent and fan of college hockey. It doesn't mean that major junior is wrong. It's actually a really good product. But I grew up in the college brand, and I'm a big believer in it. And I coached in it, and I've always enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed college hockey.
There's been a lot of different things going on in the college hockey landscape, whether it be NIL or the CHL ruling that just came out a couple of weeks ago. From your perspective, where do you think the landscape goes over the next 5 to 10 years? And more specifically, like what regions do you think realistically see the biggest increase in teams making that jump to Division I?
Well, the second part of the question, I don't know, because I don't know how realistic it is. We just saw AIC leave Division I and go down to Division II. I grew up playing in college hockey when there was clearly defined Division I, Division II, and Division III. For instance, I'll use an example. The University of Maine was an elite Division II team when I was playing college hockey, and then became a Division I team, and it took some building to get there. RIT was a top Division II team, and eventually morphed into a Division I team. So I've seen the landscape change a lot on that part of it. In terms of where I think college hockey is going, I think it's going up. The relationship, it'll be interesting to see it evolve between major, junior, and college. So this is my theory on it, and I'll make it quick. I use Brady Tkachuk as a litmus test, as an example of how good college hockey is. When he was a draft-eligible player at Boston University, he had 8 goals. He scored 8 goals. His rookie year, the next year in the NHL on a non-playoff team, he scored 23. I don't think people realize how good college hockey is and how hard it is to score. So I see most 17, 18, and 19-year-olds aren't good enough to play college hockey, but they are good enough to play major junior. And then most of those 18 and 19-year-olds aren't good enough to play pro hockey, so they want to extend their runway as a player. So what they do is eventually I think they will come and play college hockey. It will give them 2 or 3 more years to improve. And I think this is going to be great for major junior. I think it's going to be really good for college hockey. And I've told a lot of college coaches over the last 10 days or 2 weeks that the number one thing I'd do if I were a college coach is I would redefine how my staff is built. I would take away one of the assistant coaching positions and basically turn it into a hockey operations person whose only job is to scout, identify, build relationships, and find a way to make your program amenable to major junior players.
Let me quickly follow up on that, Pierre. What do you think that's going to do with the roster sizes then? If you're saying that these major junior players are sometimes don't get that opportunity to jump up and play college hockey, with the NIL ruling, there's a roster cap of 26. Does that mean a lot of schools are going to opt out of that 26?
I don't think so. I think you're going to see most of the top Division I teams that are truly in Division I to compete for a national championship. I think they'll have no problem doing that. I also think going forward, you're going to see more and more sponsorship agreements. I can tell you right now, under the leadership of Doug Christensen and the ECAC, they're searching out actively more sponsorship agreements, and I think that's great for the league. It's great for the teams involved in the league, and it's awesome for the players. And what we forget, it's not just the men's side, it's the women's side too. And I'll just tell you, I don't want to bore people with numbers, but if you go look at the enrollment of women's hockey players starting from, let's just say, 1990 to today, so a 35-year expanse of time, you will be shocked at how much greater the enrollment is for women players versus men players. I think the next great domain for hockey is not just going to be the growth of college hockey in the men's side. It's going to be the growth of women's hockey in every entity, whether it's college, professional, prep school, because there is really no junior for women. It's going to be just exponential. The growth for women's hockey is going to be massive.
You had an impressive rise to the big leagues in less than 10 years from coaching lacrosse at Hobart. And a shout out to one of our listeners, Billy Bergen, who you coached with his father there, I'm told.
One of my old teammates, Billy.
That's right. And 10 years later, you're the youngest coach in the NHL at 32 years old in Hartford. Each of us have that dream on the broadcast side, calling college games right now. For you, what made that jump so quick possible?
Well, there are lots of things. One, friendships. Two, working hard at it. Three, really not having a personal life except for living in the rink and being committed to the game. Ray Sherrill is one of my best friends, and he's the one that really pushed me. When I was, after my third year at Babson College as a coach, I got offered 6 assistant coaches jobs, 2 of them in the West and 4 of them in the East. And Ray said, Pierre, you got to go to St. Lawrence and meet Joe Marsh. So I did, and as soon as I met Coach Marsh, I knew that's where I wanted to go, and I spent 2 amazing years there. But one of the things that really worked out for me, not only were our teams really good, and Joe really endorsed our recruiting patterns, which we built up in Western Canada and north of Ottawa and into Montreal and east of Montreal. I got to meet Scotty Bowman, whose daughter was going to St. Lawrence at the time, and he was working for Hockey Night in Canada. And we developed a relationship. And after about 6 months of that relationship, he said, I think I'm going to take the New York Rangers job. And if I do, I want to hire you and have you come with me. I really enjoy the way you run practices. Well, he went and got offered the job, but he called me up and he says, I hope you didn't tell St. Lawrence you're leaving. I said, no, I didn't. Why? He goes, I'm not taking the job even though they offered it. I don't think this thing's going to work out. Well, it kind of worked out okay. Neil Smith got hired in 94. They won the cup. Now, this was 1989, so it's a little different. But then the next year, I was sitting on my couch after golfing at the golf course in Canton, New York, and I was watching ESPN, and they had breaking news. It was a press conference in Pittsburgh. Craig Patrick, Bob Johnson, and Scotty Bowman were being hired to run the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I'm telling you, there are no cell phones in those days, guys. I'm watching this breaking news on ESPN, and my phone rings in my kitchen. So I go and pick it up, and I say, hello, and there's no caller ID either. And I go, hello. He goes, Pierre? I go, yeah, it's Scotty Bowman. I'm sitting with Craig Patrick and Bob Johnson. What are you doing tomorrow? I said, well, not a lot. He goes, there'll be a plane ticket for you in Ottawa. I want you to fly to Toronto, meet me there, have your list ready of all the players you've scouted over the last 4 or 5 years. We're going to Vancouver for the NHL draft. And that was my opportunity. I am not kidding you. That's how it happened. And Scotty and I spent that whole ride from Toronto to Vancouver going over all these lists. And again, we didn't have personal computers back then. Things were a lot different. There was a lot of paper flying around, Casey, all over the place. And then we got into the meetings. I met all the guys at the Pan Pacific Hotel in Vancouver. The head scout, Greg Malone, Craig Patrick, Bob Johnson, they were all there. All the scouts were there. And at the end of the meeting, Craig grabbed me and he goes, okay, who do you think the best player in the draft is? And I said, well, the best player is Jaromir Jagr. The guy that everybody's going to take first is Owen Nolan. And he said, are you sure that Jaromir Jagr is the best player in this draft? I said, 100%. It's not close. He's the best player. So I can tell you, you see, I have no notes. Jaromir Jagr went 5th, but number 1 was Owen Nolan. Number 2 was Peter Nedved. Number 3 was Keith Primo, and number 4 was Mike Ricci. Now, that's 35 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. And number 6 after Jaromir Jagr was Scott Sissons to the New York Islanders. So I just remember, this is going to blow you guys away. I remember walking off the floor with Scotty, and he goes, "You better be freaking right, man, because it'll be a short career for you if you're wrong." So, yeah.
It's unbelievable.
He's still playing professionally. So look at that. You got him into the pro ranks in the NHL after drafting him, and he's still playing.
Yeah, no, it was a team effort. I was just part of it, but I just remember the discussion. The guy that deserves most of the credit on that is Craig Patrick. The 1980 Olympics, he was assistant to Herb Brooks, and he developed an unbelievable array of contacts in Europe, in Russia, and in Eastern Europe. And he knew that if we did it right, and it was all on him, Craig did an amazing job, he'd be able to get Jaromir out. Back then, there was no transfer agreements between the NHL and a lot of these entities in Eastern Europe in particular. And Craig went over actually right after the draft and got Jaromir out. And Jaromir didn't go back. He stayed in Pittsburgh right after the draft. So there are a lot of moving parts on it, but I'll tell you one thing. Craig Patrick was the brains behind the operation. To work for Craig was amazing as a young person. He was brilliant, really, really brilliant, and he empowered you to just go do your job. He really was great.
Focusing a little more on the broadcasting side, you work with various partners. How difficult is it to not step on them? Obviously, they have different cadences, different deliveries, but you just seem to mesh well with whomever you're paired up with, whether you're between the benches or up in the booth. How seamless is that for you, or is it really difficult and you just make a mindful effort?
What a great question. And so here's the way I would try to describe it. Every game I went into as a player or a coach or even a broadcaster, I always scouted it. So I'd scout different voice cadences with partners I might work with. I'd scout the way teams like to place. For instance, when Ken Hitchcock was coaching in the NHL, his teams were more about dumping, chasing, and forechecking. So that allows the flow of the game to go a little quicker, not as many stoppages. Other guys, Detroit, would play a puck possession game and there'd maybe be a couple more offsides. So that would change the cadence of the play-by-play. So you study all these different things and all these different trends. And so I was really fortunate. When I broke in on the radio first in Montreal with the Canadiens, I had a partner named Dino Sisto, and he was outstanding because you could tell his voice pattern pretty well. And then I went to TSN and I worked with, an amazing partner, Gordon Miller. We had an 11-year relationship that was off the charts, whether it was NHL, World Junior, Olympics. We did a lot of things together. And then Chris Cuthbert came in, and finally, Kenny Albert and Doc Emmerich. I mean, I've been really fortunate. I kind of won the lottery when it came to partners. But I did study a lot of what they did. To try to make sure that I didn't step on them.
To that end, where do you feel you have the best feel for the game? Is it between I would imagine it would have to be between the benches as opposed to high up in the broadcast area?
Between the Benches was created by Sam Flood at NBC, and I'll never forget it. It was 2004. Calgary was playing Tampa in the Stanley Cup final, and before Game 5 in Tampa, I was working the pregame show on the studio panel with Bob McKenzie of TSN and Gordon Miller of TSN. And after the hit was over, a gentleman walked up to me. He says, "Hi, I'm Sam Flood from NBC Sports. We just got the rights to the NHL." And he said, "Do you think you could broadcast a game from between the benches?" And I said, "Well, I know I can, but I can tell you right now, there's no way Gary Bettman and the NHL are going to allow that." He said, "You leave that to Dick Ebersol, who was the head of NBC Sports and an iconic person in the TV business, and me," meaning Sam Flood, "and if you think you can do it, you got the job." And I said, "Really?" He goes, "I'm telling you, you got the job." So I said, well, I know I can do it. He goes, good, just don't tell anybody, and we're going to build this out. Now, the next year was the nuclear winter. We didn't have hockey because of the work stoppage, but we did a lot of planning, almost a year's worth of planning about how inside the glass was going to work. And now I think when you watch all sports, basically everybody has copied what NBC created with that footprint of inside the glass or on the sidelines or in the dugouts for Major League Baseball. And so I think the field is fantastic down there. It allows you to tell stories and be aware of things that you would never be aware of upstairs. So I think it's a valuable position. And I credit Dick Ebersol and Sam Flood and Gary Bettman for having the courage to try it. I just want to tell you guys one quick story about the 2007 Stanley Cup Final. And I hope it doesn't bore your viewers or you guys. We were doing the playoffs early on in 2007, and Colorado was playing Anaheim. And it was the first time NBC had gone into Anaheim to do games, and there was no inside the glass position. So we went to Brian Burke, who was working out, believe it or not, by the Anaheim Ducks dressing room. He was a GM there, and I had been hired by Brian to be his coach in Hartford, one of his coaches. So I went to Berkey and I said, hey, this is Sam Flood from NBC. We got a bit of an issue. We broadcast games from He goes, I know. He's really gruff. He goes, I know what you guys do. Can you shut your mouth and just go on the bench and not bother my coaches? That's how he talks. I said, yes, Brian, we can do that. He goes, then you'll be on the bench whenever you're in Anaheim, and hopefully it's all the way to the final. Well, they went to the final. They win the cup against Ottawa in 5 games. But the story that's fun, there was a bad turnover by somebody from Anaheim, and I forget who it was. Excuse me. And I said, that's an egregious turnover by the Anaheim Duck player. Sean O'Donnell, who's a really smart guy, turns around on the bench. He's one of the big defensemen that are playing for Anaheim. He goes, what's that word? I never heard of it. And the whole, it's on tape, and I'm sure it is, you see like Chris Pronger, Scott Niedermeyer, Sean O'Donnell, Francois, they're all laughing. They're like, what the heck's he doing? And the coach is looking down the bench. What'd you say? I said, I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. This is in the middle of the game, a Stanley Cup final game. But anyways, it all worked out. But every time I think of Sean, I always think of, what's that mean? It's pretty good.
Yeah, I can speak for all of our viewers. I think you can tell stories all day and nobody will get bored of them. But shifting over to the current NHL game, obviously, you've been big into scouting your entire career. So on to 2024, 2025, what are some of the things you've been seeing, whether it be storylines, things that you've been surprised about, and kind of things that you're tracking throughout this season so far?
That is an awesome question because trends change all the time. You can have 4 different trending storylines over the course of an 82-game schedule or in college over the course of a 32 to 34-game schedule. I love that question. The importance of the third line that manufactures offense. So I'll use a case in point. The number 1 team in the league right now are the Winnipeg Jets. So with Nino Niederreiter, Adam Lowry, and Mason Appleton, right now it can be argued. Doesn't mean they are, but right now you could argue that's the best depth line in the National Hockey League. And because of that depth line, they're the number 1 team right now. It doesn't mean that'll last forever in the NHL. So a trending story for me as I watch all these teams, what kind of supplemental offense are you getting from your third line? Not your fourth line. What are you getting from your third line? Another trending thing is in-zone coverage. Everybody wants to play, quote-unquote, the hybrid system. Nobody really knows what the hybrid system is with in-zone coverage. So I'll use the Montreal Canadiens as an example. They've really improved. In the last 3 games, they shut out Edmonton last night, but in the last 3 games, they've played a ton better. They've won 2 games in a row. And what they've done is they put a lot more pressure in the neutral zone on the puck carrier, so it's harder access into their zone. They've done a better job from the hash mark to the icing line, eliminating people more quickly. And they've taken away options because their down low coverage is better. So there's an example of another trend. In-zone coverages have to be far more aggressive. So if you're not, because everybody's running these high cycles right now with the interchange between the defense and the forwards, if you're not taking away space early, you're in trouble. So that's another trend in the league. And the one trend I would like to see more of that's not there yet, I'd like to see the NHL take out the the goal lines where the goalies can't play the trapezoid, where the goalies can't play the puck. Because I think if you took the trapezoids out and allowed the goalies to play the puck, there'd be way more mistakes, and it would lead to way better opportunities to score. And I think we need more goals as we go forward.
Definitely. I think one thing that you mentioned there with the depth scoring, right? Like, I think an opposite use case right there is the Boston Bruins. I was at the game last night and just felt like there was not a lot outside of those top guys that were really giving production, and they were booed off the ice against Columbus at home. So it's definitely an interesting way that you point that out there.
No, but that's a huge point, and I'll show you what. So think about 2 years ago. Boston had Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci, and Charlie Coyle. Those were their top three centers. Well, that's not their top three centers anymore. So if you don't have thrust through the middle of the ice and you're not dominating faceoffs, which they used to with those three, imagine Charlie Coyle in the 3-hole. I mean, that's a hell of a player, and that's a hell of a situation if you got two guys better than him. And that's why they were so good. Jimmy Montgomery's first year, they were excellent because those guys were so good down the middle. They're not nearly as good down the middle anymore. I think they were counting on a lot more from Matt Poitras, and now he's playing in Providence, and that hasn't happened for him. So we'll see. I don't like it when fans go after coaches, and just because I was a coach, and I get it. But I'll tell you this: in the NHL, coaches don't pick the players. The management and the scouts pick the players. And I just don't know if Jimmy's been given a roster that's good enough to compete at the level that fans expect.
I'm gonna counter that Matt point by saying Pasternak had 0 shots on goal yesterday. So to say the top line was doing everything it could last night, it's not. I don't think is very accurate. Let's stick in the East. My favorite team, the New York Rangers. They've been struggling this season, and now Philip Hedl gets another injury. Nobody knows how long he's going to be out. You talked about third line scoring. That line of Hedl, Cooley, and Kakko has been tremendous for the Rangers. What do you see coming up for them? You know, right now Johnny Brodzinski is scheduled to slot in, but what do you see from that lineup and their forwards?
It's such a good question because I agree with you. And we talked about this. I thought the two best on my podcast, which is called The Eye Test with my partner, Jimmy Murphy. I thought the two.
Great lesson, by the way.
Thank you. The two best depth lines in the league was Cooley, Hedl in New York, and what they were able to do with whomever played on the right side. And then you look at what we talked about with Winnipeg. And now without Hedl, who's having a tremendous start to the year, that's a big, big problem. I think Kakko's going to continue to evolve and get better as a player in New York. I don't know. The one thing I'd say, though, Jonathan Quick is like found money. The depth and goal overcomes a lot of the blemishes that are part of maybe the Rangers' defense. I would like to see, and I don't know what you guys think, but I'd like to see Keandre Miller be a more reliable defender. So I think that's an important thing for them. And the other thing that set them back a little bit, the injury to Ryan Lindgren at the start of the year. He's such an important player, especially when he's paired with Adam Fox. So there's a lot, but the Rangers are a good team. I give them a lot of credit. By the way, fellas, I love coaches. Like, I really respect what they do because I've walked in their shoes. Peter Laviolette, I remember when he was a player. I was coaching at Babs, and he was a player at Westfield State. Like, I'm just telling you where this guy's come from and where he is now. I remember when he started coaching in Wheeling, West Virginia in the East Coast Hockey League. He has had an amazing career. He's one of the best American-born coaches of all time. And he's had a spectacular run. And I think with Phil Halsey there, and Michael Pekka there, they're an amazing coaching staff. I think one of the best in the NHL. I really do.
So obviously kids will watch the games on TV and, growing up, they want to be, Connor McDavid or Sidney Crosby. And, me and everybody else doesn't have the skill or the athleticism to ever really fill those shoes. But, when watching the game as an announcer and analyst, who are some of the guys in the league right now that you would think kids could model their games around and give them a better chance to make it to that professional level?
Well, I like that. JT Miller would be one that comes to mind right away. He's not super fast. He's not super big. He's just really good. So you can see, like, he's a valuable guy. Anze Kopitar, I will never forget this, fellas. In 2005, I was at the World Championships in Austria. It was in Innsbruck and it was in Vienna. And David Conti's a legendary scout for the ever. He was with the New Jersey Devils. Then he went to Vegas, and now he's with the New York Islanders. And David and I were just sitting in an empty rink in Innsbruck, which is more known for skiing than hockey, in the spring of 2005. I will never forget this. And he goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm watching Kopitar because I want to be ready." Now, that's his draft year. And he said to me, "Pierre, there's only one player in the draft better than him." I said, "Come on." He goes, "Nope, there's only one player in the draft better than him." And I go, "Well, it's got to be Crosby." He goes, "It is Crosby. That's the only one better. And all these teams are going to make a mistake, and he will not go in the top 10. Now, that's from a development guy, one of the top scouts in the history of the NHL, David Conti. And he was right on. And I was watching this guy, and you guys can look it up online. In 2005, the Slovenians almost beat, and I didn't say Slovakians, the Slovenians almost beat Canada, and Canada had a murderer's row of players because of Anze Kopitar. And so you talk about players who players can copy. Kopitar's an amazing player. You can learn so much from watching him every day. Watch him every day. Sam Bennett, watch him every day. There's a bunch of guys like that you can study and learn so much. They're not always the slickest guys. They're just the smartest guys.
Between Olympics and Stanley Cup finals, you've been a part of almost every one of the biggest events in hockey. What are some of the most memorable moments that will last with you forever after your career's over?
The first Stanley Cup for Chicago in 2010. They hadn't won the Cup since '61. I had coached against them in '92. We swept them when I was in Pittsburgh, and Mike Keenan and Daryl Sutter were running the Blackhawks. So the 2010 Patrick Kane goal in Game 6 in Philadelphia was pretty special. I remember that one very clearly. Laviolette in Carolina winning in 06 in Game 7 against Edmonton is one that I remember really clearly. The 2010 Olympics in Canada, the pressure was so on Canada to win, Casey. It was amazing. And, I'll never forget it. Between the benches, you guys will appreciate this. Ginla's in the corner. Ryan Miller's in goal for USA. And Crosby, who's not really a vocal player, but I could hear him. You're talking about 18,000 people screaming and yelling on top of you. And he's going, "Iggy, Iggy, Iggy." And I know what he's trying to do, but I'm wondering if Jerome can even hear him. And all of a sudden, the puck comes out front to Sid, and he sticks it to the back of the net, and Canada wins. I'm telling you guys right now, of all the things I've been a part of, I got goosebumps thinking about it right now. Of all the things, that's the one I remember, because it wasn't just the moment. It was the internal relief of a whole country, because they'd been embarrassed in 06. 06 was an unbelievable embarrassment in Torino. Trust me, it was bad. And 02, I was in Salt Lake City. I wasn't doing the games. I was working on a panel, so I saw them win in 02. But 2010, you could just feel the whole country just, thank God we won. And to take it one step further, I started leaving the compound outside. It was GM Place at the time, I think. Now it's Rogers Arena. And I was walking out, and I got swarmed by fans. Nothing bad. They were awesome. They just wanted a high five and way to go. And the RCMP saw that, and they were worried that I was going to get overrun. So the guy picks me up and puts me on the back of his horse and rides me to my hotel. I was sitting on the back of a horse going back to my hotel. And I said to the officer, I said, "I can't thank you enough." He goes, "No, we were worried you were going to get run over." I was like, "No, well, it was great. The fans were awesome." But yeah, it's one of those I'll never forget. I'll never forget that.
It would be a perfect way to finish it off, but I got one more that I got to throw a one up to each of the guys on here. We've had some intense discussions about the talent level of Brady Tkachuk, and I seem to be the only one on our podcast that is a big believer in him. You brought his name up earlier in the show, and you were part of his signing process. You guys talked about that on the Sick podcast. What makes him such an unbelievable talent in the NHL?
He's vicious, man. You don't want to play against this guy. Every single day is like a nightmare if you play against him. He's unpredictable. He's tough as nails. He's passionate to score. He's not afraid to fight anybody. He's really loyal to his teammates in those kinds of situations. He establishes slot area presence probably as well right now I'm just going around the league thinking about those types of players as well as any player in the league. And his ability to play pucks off the boards. And this is a way undervalued thing in the NHL, guys. Players that can make plays off the boards. It's hard to do, and he does it as well or better than most players in the league right now. I was heavily involved in the contract negotiations with him, and it's one of those that I'll always remember because it required both sides to give a little and take a little. So it was an interesting negotiation, but it was well worth it for Ottawa, and it was obviously great for the Tkachuk family. But I'm a big Brady fan. He's a kind of guy you have to win. You need to have a player like that to win.
Perfect way to finish it off. Matt and George will never be able to top that one. Pierre, you are the man. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here.
You guys have my number. Case, you can call anytime. You can text anytime. I love your passion for the game. I just think it's so great that people care so much about hockey. And I know where you guys are from, and I just think it's awesome. Two of the best years of my life were in the North Country. I know it was on the wrong side of the tracks for you guys, but that's okay. I loved Canada. I'd always go visit Potsdam from time to time, so I kind of know it pretty well. And one of my best friends in the world is Billy O'Flaherty, the longtime coach and athletic director at Clarkson. So I'm a big fan.
Next time you're up, if it's warmer than it's about to be for the next 5 months, we'll have to get out on the golf course. That might be the one time, other than the rivalry series, I take a trek down Route 11 to go to that town.
Here's the one thing. I think the next time I'm there, it'll be snowing, so we'll have to either go somewhere we can warm up. How's that?
Sounds good to me. Pierre, thanks so much.
You guys are great. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Man, awesome interview with Pierre there, and a guy I could listen to talk as long as he wanted to. And he said, hopefully he's not boring us. No chance we were getting bored there.
Yeah, I could listen to him for another 6 hours, tell some stories of him back in the day. So a great interview. Really appreciate him hopping on.
And hopefully we'll have him back coming up. Maybe a guy we can get towards the trade deadline would be a great insider to have coming back. But time to get frisky. You had me heated in a car ride back towards Halloween, and a couple of your buddies called us up when we were driving home from the UMass game and posed the question of whether or not they could score an NHL point in a season. The original question came between ranking the 4 major sports on which would be the easiest to do between getting on base facing an MLB pitcher, scoring a point in the NBA, scoring a touchdown in the NFL, or scoring a point in hockey. I think there's no chance that anybody on that phone call goes anywhere near sniffing a point in the NHL.
I'd like to play the devil's advocate here for a second. I think there are a couple opportunities that would allow for a mid-level to low-level amateur beer league player, as myself would be, to potentially get on the score sheet in an 82-game NHL season, averaging 16 minutes a night. Now, the first would be Matt Leonardo hops off the bench. He stands at the bench for about 2 seconds. The puck hits off of his stick and is picked up by Sir Connor McDavid. And Mr. McDavid goes between 3 guys, between his own legs, and puts the puck in the net for a primary assist from Matt Leonardo. That's crazy scenario number 1. Number 2 here, you put me in at right wing right at the start of the power play, okay? You get your ideal lineup. You get Jordan Stahl or Nico Sturm in the center to win yourself a faceoff. And you've got Ovechkin on your point there. You've got Cale Makar running on top, and you got McDavid on the other side. And then you've got a stocky 5'11", 160 Matt Leonardo, who is praying that he's playing against the San Jose Sharks and Jan Ruda on that right side of the defense, who would not know where I am just for whatever reason, because that's typically how it looks like he plays. And a puck goes about 90 miles an hour off of my body and finds its way either into the net or off of my body and to either side of McDavid or Ovechkin to have a goal go by Alexander Georgiev for his 8th goal out of the night. These are the two options that I kind of see myself potentially filling that void. A lot of NHL teams that are having some middle six scoring issues could call me up for a point here. However, after some investigation, I do not think it is as feasible as I think. However, I think the opportunity resides itself there. And I think that's why you mentioned the 4 major sports. I think the one of those 4 that I think is feasibly impossible is scoring an NFL touchdown. I think even if you're on the 1 yard line with the tush push, you not only have to be able to get the snap picked up from the center, but you need to find a way to move your legs forward. And I think with the amount of 350-pound bodies in front of me, there is absolutely no shot I'm going to be able to find myself even a yard to get into the end zone. So for me, I think the easiest is a 3-pointer. You just fuck some shit up and hope it goes in, or you get fouled and go to the line and get lucky. I think getting on base, hit by pitch, walk, maybe just find some wild pitcher to stand in front of and hope for the best. And then you've got the McDavid goes through 4 people and the puck happened to hit Matt Leonardo. And then you've got the actual only one that would require some sort of athletic ability, which would be scoring a touchdown.
I was fired up. Now I'm a little bit more docile for this conversation. I was screaming at the phone when this was brought up, and the thought that at 165 you think this was after, now that I think about it, I didn't even bring up this argument. The argument with hockey was, oh, I could stand on top of the crease and have Connor McDavid shoot it off me. The fact that you think you could go anywhere remotely near the crease, you could be a 5-on-3 power play, and at 165, you're not getting anywhere in position to have the puck touch your body. 1. 2. There are so many good NHL hockey players. This was the point that gained me a little bit of traction and respect in this argument. There are so many outstanding NHL hockey players that play full seasons and never record a point. Us dust bags aren't going to go anywhere near the stat sheet. I can barely score in beer league, nonetheless in hockey. And I've played with D1 women's hockey players when we go postseason and just kick it around. And I thought I was getting bagged during that skate when it was me plus 4 D1 players against 5 D1 players. And then the week later, we added in a few of the guys' players who were probably playing at about 3% for the game that we were scrimmaging. And the amount of space that you think you see, that you make the pass in beer league 10 out of 10 times, that space, when the second I look towards where that puck is going, the puck goes off my stick. There's no space anymore because those guys are so good. Those are college players. Half of those guys would not be able to make a point in the NHL. And you have the audacity to say that in 2 situations, you're going to get a point going. No, sir. NHL is by far the hardest, in my opinion. And I will stand up by that one to the grave. I will agree with you. Basketball has to be up there because I've made a half-court shot or 2 in my career, just zipping them around the gym. And I think if we put it in the scenario of 100 chances, 100 rushes up the NBA court, and we're trying to surprise them mid-quarter and just huck up a half-court 3, maybe we make one of those. Football is going to be my number 2. And the reason is because we don't have to do all of the work. If you put a half-decent offensive line in front of us, think about the amount of times that running backs just get to trot their way into the end zone from the 1 yard line. In 100 chances, our O-line's got to be getting us 1 touchdown. And I'm crediting my team for that one. Then baseball, maybe we get walked. NHL, no chance we're going anywhere near a point. And the fact that you call yourself a hockey fan and think that you have any sort of chance of touching a puck on the NHL ice just stifles me.
I think the problem here is the objective, right? I think those guys who are very good hockey players not putting up a point in 82 games, their objective isn't always to lay down in front of the crease and get hit by a puck, or
you're not even
luckily
getting
getting
bounced
bounced
down in
on
front of the crease when any defenseman puts their stick to your bump and you are on your face.
I'll keep drawing penalties if I need to. They'll call cross checks in
It's
front
not
of
a
the net.
penalty.
Wes
It's
McCauley's got me. Wes
You would
McCauley's
not be
got
able
me.
to remotely stand on your skates if you got nudged by any of those guys.
I got my Timmy Stutzla flop in the bag. Come on now. You know I can get those drawn. No worries at all.
Doesn't
And then
even
we're at
get
a
called.
5-on-3. And we're perfect. I just need to skate a little close. I need to potentially get hit by something and then a little redirect. And Nick Boopy's going to help me out. That's all I got to say. It's definitely a team effort there as much as it is in the NFL. I'm doing little to no work there. I think the biggest challenge, like you mentioned, is getting in a spot where I will be hit by the puck. However, there is a lot of opportunities for me to get hit by a puck and then picked up by the best player in the world. I'm just saying.
We'll give you your dream all-star team of McDavid and Brady Tkachuk, obviously, out there, and Leon Draisaitl, and whatever other players you want to put anywhere in the NHL in a 5-on-3 against the San Jose Sharks. And I would be willing to bet you're still not touching the puck because probably any of those players are not going to pass it to you in that situation. The best part that came out of our conversation with Pierre McGuire, and what a way to close it off here, is how Brady Tkachuk is the absolute man. Last week, Joseph hopped on the wagon. He's a Tkachuk fan. While I'm getting riled up right now, the Hurricanes have just come back. It's 3-3, and we've got life. And I am walking away from this podcast with my chin in the air, waltzing out, baby, because I am right. You have absolutely, this is an even worse take. There is nothing that you can say that is going to make Pierre McGuire wrong, because that is one of the most respected people in all of hockey, and you're just some chump from Boston who's sitting in Tennessee right now.
Hey, when you preload the gun for him and put his finger on the trigger and put it to his head, he might just pull it. You know what I mean? You made it super easy for him to give him a softball kind of question. And again, I am not on the Brady Tkachuk sucks wagon. I'm on the Brady Tkachuk has not proven that he can lead a team to a championship or even the playoff wagon. So tell me when I'm wrong in that aspect, because he, time and time again, very good player. Do not get me wrong. But it takes more than Brady Tkachuk to get a team to the playoffs. It didn't take that much for guys like McDavid and Crosby and all these guys that you're putting him up in this upper echelon with of the top 15 of the league, right? Guys who can really carry their team to a championship. He's not that guy because we've seen for the last 6 years, Ottawa's been in a dumpster. And they're, again, in 7th place in the Atlantic Division. That's been an absolute dumpster. So I'll keep my chin high and continue to watch Ottawa plummet in the standings as we head into the Christmas break. And Brady Tkachuk's an amazing point-per-game player, but not even the best Tkachuk in the league right now.
I think this season he's been better than Matty, but we'll have that argument on a later day. Brady Tkachuk is the man. The Senators are going to come back, and when the Sens make the playoffs and you have to drive to Potsdam, New York, and then to Ottawa for the first round of the playoffs, I will buy you a nice foam hat, and I'm going to up the ante here. You have to wear that sucker for the entire next episode. Just as a ha-ha, I'm right, you're wrong. Brady Tkachuk is the absolute man. Matty, what do you got going on this week? It's Thanksgiving, spending a little time with the family, and you are down in Tennessee.
Yeah, we're down south. Played a decent round of golf yesterday. Got something on the calendar for tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So pretty much a golfing parlay down here in the greater Tellico Village area. But other than that, just eating good food and spending good time with good people. It's pretty much nothing more you could ask for in life.
So what I'm hearing is I should bring the sticks down. Are we going to see a Matt Leonardo appearance in Nashville, Tennessee? Has that been decided yet?
We're still in the works on that. There's a lot of moving pieces. Got to get back up to Cincinnati for a football game that's got a high of 28 degrees on Sunday. So pray for me there. But we are still in the works on the latter half of the week as we approach the Clarkson women's team out in Nashville.
Well, I'm on the fritz of heading down there. The second we hang up this call, my butt is going to be in the heated Prius seat, and I'm heading your way. I'm getting picked up by the box truck tomorrow morning, and we're finishing the drive down. Me and equipment manager Jake Facey, I got all the suits packed, the cowboy boots ready to go, and we're doing some line dancing, baby. Yeah! That's how I'm celebrating Thanksgiving. We got line dancing lessons with the team. I'm jacked up, buddy, and hopefully we'll get to see you on the way. But otherwise, we'll talk later on this week. This has been another episode of the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast, episode 19. Make sure to check us out on all of the social media, Instagram and TikTok at Fifth Liners Pod, and on Twitter at Fifth Line Pod. That is the number 5TH for Fifth. You can also follow us on YouTube and Spotify for the full episodes. Thanks for listening, everybody. Until next time, have a good one.